Hey everybody, I'm Greg Sowell, and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go-around is Liz Giuffre. So this doctor lady is a senior lecturer at the University of Technology in Sydney by day, and by night she's an author, blogger, and podcaster. Liz isn't a fan of gatekeepers, I think you'll notice in this conversation, or honestly really anyone that stands in the way of progress. I think we need more people like that. She's opinionated and funny, which is one of my favorite combos. So I bet it's going to be yours too. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this chat with Liz. Liz, thank you for joining me on the Why Am I podcast today.
That's my pleasure, Greg.
Excellent. Oh, you say that. It is absolutely my pleasure. You are such a treat, a delight already. I feel like this is going to be ridiculous, and yeah. I'm here for it. So
you say that to all the girls. Don't think I don't know.
If you say so. I say it to all the people that are a little bit crazy, half past crazy, that have
bananas.
To have a good time in the fantasy restaurant. So that's more for me than it is for you. That's really, you're just warming me up. That's what we're doing there. So cool. You and I have run into each other. Where should we run into each other at? We're at the outlet mall, and we're shopping for cardigans because the weather's getting a little chilly, right? And yep. I like your style. It's kind of funky. It's cool. Obviously you have an interesting accent that's slightly different than mine. Mm-hmm. And, we just kind of strike up a conversation. We talk back and forth. You're polite. You ask me, about myself, and I'm super boring, and we're done with that very rapidly. So now, Liz, it's your turn to reciprocate. So who are you, bud?
Well, I am, at the moment, I'm an academic, and I'm a mum and a daughter and a friend and all those things. So I'm in my office here at the moment. If I wasn't with you in the Outward Mall, I'd be in my office here at the University of Technology in Sydney, where I teach music and sound and communications. So that's what I do. And like I said, I get to do all this fun stuff and call it a living. It's all right. It's pretty good.
So you started with academic. How does that strike you? Like, say 8-year-old Liz thinks, I want to be an academic. Was that not in the cards?
It's one of those things because you kind of have to rehearse it, right? Like if you run into people, then what do you do? Like, it's a nice, easy one. I used to say writer or journalist because that's what I was back in the day. And I still am, I guess. But academic's a nice catch-all. And that's technically what I'm doing when I'm at work. That's technically what it says on the door. I'm a doctor lady. But I don't know. I mean, little 8-year-old Liz didn't really know what she wanted. She wanted to be a bus driver or a kindergarten teacher. So that might still happen. Who knows?
It's teaching of a sort.
Oh, no, it's totally teaching. I was teaching yesterday. A big part of my job is teaching, and I really like teaching. Big part of what I do is writing, which is great too, and researching. That's really cool. And then the last little bit is service they talk about. So that's all the internal admin business and outreach and all that stuff, which, to be honest, I wish we did more of, because one of the things that does frustrate me about universities and all that stuff is it's set up to be behind walls in some ways, which makes sense because, you've got to get to a certain level to be able to understand it. But I don't think those walls should be as high as they are and held up as often as they are. But that's the system, so.
Well, you say set it behind walls. You mean for like people to get into the university to actually learn?
Yeah, to get in, but also to read the stuff we do. So, there's a real push to be, writing in academic journals and, published with certain publishers that cost a lot of money to access. You know what I mean? And so that's a source of frustration and something that hopefully is going to change. Because there's a lot of people now in academia saying, I didn't do this just so that 3 other people who already agreed with me could read what I said. You know what I mean?
Well,
so,
What's the rationale you think of actually like locking that behind a paywall? Like, why would they do that as opposed to publishing it kind of open source sort of?
Well, there's a couple of parts. First of all, it's because there's a publisher in between that stands to make a lot of money, always, right? As any kind of industry.
Follow the money sort of thing.
Yeah, and then they've made deals with the university libraries, so you can really only afford, only libraries can afford to buy things. And so therefore, if it's in the library, then you've got to be part of the uni in order to access the library and blah, blah, blah. And so it goes and so it goes. But there is a move towards much more open access and, all of that stuff. But I guess the downside is then there's a feeling that it's not been gate-kept in the right way, or that there's not been quality controlled in the right way, because certainly if things are done properly, that old idea of peer review is something that takes time and costs money, and that's good. You want to definitely, when you're doing, if the last few years has taught us anything, you want reliable information to get out. You want the best minds in the world to have looked at something and really thought about it hard before it goes out there, and that takes time and money. That I can appreciate. But not everything we do should.
I was going to say, as an American that just went through some interesting elections, I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah, making sure that the truth is out there, that things are factually checked, and completely foreign to me.
When a little bug gets out and, should we stay home? Should we not stay home? Should we wash our hands? Is it real? Is it even real? It's a bit inconvenient. What's going on?
Oh, my goodness. Well, something else that kind of struck me is set up behind walls. I think there's a barrier of entry for teachers too, right? Like you guys, not only do you have to climb Mount Everest, but you have to do it while you're jumping through flaming hoops and everything else. It's pretty bonkers what they make you guys go through before you can actually instruct. Like, what are your kind of thoughts on that? I was just curious.
Look, and I think the American system's actually even worse in some ways, but yeah, it's pretty hard. Like I was in precarious work for 15 years, and that's if I hadn't got this job that I've got, I was going. And so it makes it a lot harder for women, it makes it a lot harder for anybody who's got caring responsibilities, anybody that doesn't want to move. It's certainly, and if you've not got money behind you or anything like that, it means it really, really does set up a disadvantage, which is hard because do you really just want one type of person in there? You know what I mean? Like, and I don't care what type of person it is. Diversity is the thing that gives us richness and that gives us the most clarity on anything. You shouldn't have one type of any type, It should be as many different types as possible. So yeah, it's definitely an issue, and it's something that, we're working on, that lots of places are working on. Where I am, I'm lucky we've got a really strong union and we push against casualisation and all that stuff. But I think that, it's like anything where big business sees the value from their perspective of keeping people casualised, they'll keep doing it. You know what I mean? So
I have no idea. What does casualization mean? Like I've never heard that phrase before.
Oh, okay. So people are employed on a casual contract as opposed to a continuing contract. So it's probably called tenure over there. But for here, for example, for a long, long time, if you were a teacher to come and teach a course, you might only be hired for the classes that you teach for that semester, and that's it. And so that will happen for years and years and years. Or maybe you'd be hired for a year to do bits and pieces. In America, it's terrible. You hear of people who are only hired for 9 months of the year. And then what are they meant to do for the other 3 months? But that's a standard, what? It's not like you're a Santa Claus, you know what I mean? Where there's nothing going on in February. Like there's still work to be done. And really, if you want to be, it's not as if just when the students aren't there's nothing else to be done. You're prepping everything for next semester. You're wrapping up everything from last semester. You're writing things. You're keeping the lights on. You're doing all of the, having a holiday and being sick, heaven forbid, all that stuff. So, but casualisation doesn't work like that. It just expects that you turn up, you do the work you do, and you go away again. And who knows what happens in the meantime. But the problem is, there's much more work than there are full-time workers. So there's whole industries built on this idea that people would just keep on turning up, working really hard for intense periods, and then, stretching, eating nuggets and white bread in the lean periods, coming back again, So it's a problem, and hopefully something that, gradually will be looked at, because it's just not sustainable. Like I said, it's certainly not. And don't get me wrong, I'm in an extremely privileged position to work in what I work in, to do what I do. It would be much harder if I was in retail or if I was in, the gig economy anywhere else, So I'm very, very lucky to have a continuing job now. But yeah, the barriers to it are high, and they keep getting higher, it feels like. You know what I mean? What I had to do to get my job and just the literal qualifications I needed to get my job was 3 and 4 times more than what the people who already had it had. You're like, how does that work? But, you know, I mean, on the other side of things is people talk about, is there a relative oversupply of people that have PhDs and want to get into teaching in academia? Is there, I don't know, more pesky ladies want to come and do it, or pesky people who, you know, weren't traditionally part of the academy are now knocking on the doors? I mean, oh, goodness, you know, who knows?
Yeah, for sure. What really kind of interests me about it is there's a massive university here. I think there's 60,000 plus students or something like that. So it's really big. And I do some work with various programs over there, just kind of helping them out. So sort of volunteer stuff, kind of in the tech industry or whatever. And it's kind of a bucket list. I love teaching people. And I asked
you volunteer though? Sorry to interrupt, but you volunteer, they don't pay you?
Yeah.
Why don't they pay you?
Well, it's just, I don't know, it's volunteer. I just pop in and help where I can. I mean, not too frequently, maybe a handful of times every year, something like that. Kind of help them build like a lab up and, you know, just sort of mentor some of the students or whatever. I don't know. It was kind of like a bucket list thing for me. And I love kind of fulfilling that role. But I was thinking, could I make it something maybe more a little official? And I was thinking, you know, I would love to do, I'm not sure if they call it over there, but like adjunct professor, where you just kind of pop in and maybe teach one semester. And I was thinking that would be really cool, you know, as like kind of a bucket list thing. And the guy's really cool. That was my friend, and he said, let me break it down to you. At this place, we basically sell pieces of paper. And if you don't have that piece of paper, then we can't let you come in and do that thing. And I was like, oh, I mean, technically I get it, you know. It was like, but also a lot of the people that are instructors there have always been in academia, right? They've never really been in the technology field, so they don't have a lot of experience, like actually turning the knobs, or when you would do these things, or what does it look like when you're engaging with people in various industries? Like, whereas people are out there doing that stuff, they do have that knowledge. And like you said, they've created these artificial barriers, and they aren't letting anybody through. He was like, well, but we do have kind of this sister organization, and I've got way more than, you know, like I've got so much stuff. You would never have a free second if you have time over here or whatever. But I just thought it was so interesting that they would kind of arbitrarily choose. I mean, every now and then I can go and do a lecture, like a guest lecture, and that's cool. But you don't.
But they should be paying you for that.
As much time.
No, but they should also be paying you for that. This is the thing that because I mean, there is that, and different universities have different expectations as well. I'm not sure the American system around the Ivy Leagues and the communities. I've seen Community. That's a documentary, right? Like Joel McHale. That's how it works. Isn't that true? That's totally.
I wish. I've seen it so many times that it feels like the truth. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it must be that on Greece. Like, that's what I know about the American systems.
That's all you need to know about the American system.
Oh, well. But, I mean, you're right. There are these kind of the hierarchies within hierarchies. And, I mean, yes, look, in some ways, you want somebody who's got a certain level of education. Well, education or RPL, like recognition of prior learning is what they'd say. So, absolutely, if you can say, well, I've got 20 years experience in this field that you're trying to teach people to get into, then the only stopgap when you're teaching is to make sure you know much more about the content than probably the person who is teaching it, who's never been in the field. You're right. But you do just want a teeny little gap that says, but do you know how to teach people? But there are a lot of academics who don't get that little bit, because once you get the piece of paper, and the piece of paper is, and by the piece of paper I mean a PhD or a master's or whatever piece of paper they want, you know, it's a system that's been set up. They're degree factories in some ways. Yeah. You know, and in some ways that's really good because, you know, it's a time where you can really get your teeth into something, and hopefully, you know, in order to qualify in the first place, you should be contributing new knowledge and doing all of that stuff. So it's a really important thing. And, you know, I would never say that somebody shouldn't study a thing that they feel passionate about and they think that they could add something to in the world. But you're right, that kind of barrier to entry, particularly when they're not paying you. I mean, again, with respect to your friend and the organisation, these places aren't charities. These places have money. They pay a lot of money to the people in charge, a lot of money. So that's the difficult thing, right? When they sit there and they say, we can't afford to pay a guest lecturer or we need a volunteer. Volunteer, at the local preschool or at the local primary school or whatever. But universities do not need to have volunteers. Like they've got money, and that's part of what we argue here too, is that, if it's casualized or there's all this invisible work, this work that if you do this, then you'll be eligible for that. Or if you do this, it'll be, and there's one thing to say it's experience, but experience is also what people, it's exposure, sorry, and experience and exposure. But exposure is also what people die of if you leave them out in the cold, you know what I mean? So you can't, this idea that it's all exposure, experience, it's exploitation too, you got to be really, really careful. But then it's also very hard to, they cash in on the fact that people like this stuff, and they want to do the thing, particularly when it comes to teaching. I do think it's a vocation, and I do think it's something that, if you're drawn to do it and you enjoy doing it, it's kind of in you, There's lots of people who do it because they have to, because it's part of the gig and they clearly hate it. But I mean, I don't know what to say to those people except sucks to be you. That's awful,
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of wacky over here. So having lived here and been around some of these people, they had kind of a little shakeup over at the university a few years back where they cut back on some of the, what do they call them? TAs, like our teaching
assistants. Yeah.
So there were some PhDs that were, it was their class, but they hadn't stepped foot in a class for, I think, like 12 to 15 years. So literally their classes for over a decade had been taught by TAs, and they were forcing them to come back in the classroom. So it's like, well, that's kind of crazy, because I thought the whole idea of being a professor meant you actually teach people, but I guess some are just like purely research scientists.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it's hard because in some ways, being a teacher or teaching classes, like if you want the reward, I guess, for research is to buy out your teaching. And so, I mean, I don't know, I guess, and you got to be careful, I think, because that, again, sets a hierarchy within hierarchies. And don't get me wrong, the crowd control of dealing with, 18-year-olds who don't really want to be there has it's got its other side to it, you know what I mean? But to me, I think if I can get something that I'm working on, an idea I'm working on, if I can convince a bunch of disinterested 18-year-olds that it's a good idea, then I'm not scared of peer review. You know what I mean? And in fact, I think that's more valuable than peer review. If I can, workshop an idea in a classroom and really try and convince people, or the opposite, throw an idea out there and they throw back at me a whole bunch of reasons why it doesn't make sense, it's not very valuable, it's just about me. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing too. It's really hard when you're researching in that little bubble. Are you actually saying anything that's going to connect with people who aren't in your bubble? So I mean, it's a hard one. But I've always liked teaching as well. I think it's a really valuable thing. But it is also the type of thing that the work creep comes in as well. So I find myself, not just when I started teaching, involved getting into a lecture hall, delivering a lecture live, going to a tutorial, delivering a tutorial live. You might have a couple of emails one side or another, but that was it. Whereas now it feels like it's a full production. I'm making lectures every week that are online. I'm making podcasts. I'm making videos for this and videos for that, and cheat sheets for this and cheat sheets for that. And while it's great, it's just, I have been a writer. I guess I am a producer, but that's not, you know what I mean? The work creeps up and creeps up and creeps up. And that is hard to keep on top of. Plus, too, when you want to be able to do the best by students who are also much more pressed for time and resources than back in the day. You know what I mean? If I've got a student, when I started, if a student missed class, they missed class. That's on them. Whereas now, you want to try and be a bit more compassionate where you can. Like, I don't know how it is in the States, but over here at the moment, we're in the middle of a real, cost of living crisis. And I know that my students are having rents go up $100 a week. So somebody says to me, I can't come to class this week because I have to take this shift. I want to do what I can, to help them get through. You know what I mean? I can't do the work for them, but if I can send them the notes, or if I can meet them at another time or something like that, then I want to do that, and I'll do my best to do that. But then that is time that I'm not spending on something else. So it's that juggle. and then the university starts to expect that and build that into their business model, dare I say, which is also that hard thing because you're like, well, that's great. You also can't keep expecting that people are going to be absorbing this work because it's not sustainable, If nothing else, you just can't do it well. And that's the thing. Like, I'm sort of mindful that I would rather do fewer things well than lots of things badly. But I feel like that's the choice that we're all making. The students are making the same choice. I'll have some who, in theory, they're studying full-time, they're working full-time, they might be caring for a family member or keeping it all together and whatever. I mean, and sometimes you just have to have the hard but true conversation to say, right, well, you can't do all of this well. So you just have to acknowledge and appreciate if you get 55 out of 100, but you're still standing, you know what? I think that's a really good achievement. I mean, yes, if you didn't have all this other stuff going on, you probably could have got 95, but you do. So given time and circumstance, you got to cut yourself some slack. You got to, just give yourself a bit of a break. And those are the hard conversations too, because you don't want people to aim for mediocrity, but at the same time, you got to aim for what's reasonable and what's possible. There's no point getting 95 if you've also destroyed the rest of your life in order to do it. You know what I mean? Like it's not worth it.
Yeah. I always thought, I went to what we call over here a technical school. So it was just 2 years, hyper-focused, did the thing, got out, and then I started working or whatever. Like, so I didn't get like the true university experience or whatever, but it seems like to me that it's a good like bridge between childhood and adulthood where, you still sort of have a safety net under you, not fully, and you're kind of on your own. And so it's this place to figure that out, right? Where you find where your limits are. You feel probably for the first time what it feels like to be burnt out and exhausted. And, so it feels like an amazing opportunity to fail and maybe, not fail finally, right? But fail and then learn to adjust.
No, I think so. And I mean, look, one of the things that I always say to my students is I'm not going to call you mum. Like if you want to turn up, don't turn up. You want to be off being busy, being young and beautiful, you do that. Everyone I know who's really successful had at least one semester where they failed, where the wheels fell off the trolley for whatever reason. Big breakup, too much partying, too much work, whatever happened. And then the difference is what you do about it, but just accept that if it's going to hit the fan, it's going to hit the fan, and then, get up, sort it out. I mean, what's hard is that, I think because people are staying at home longer and because it's just costing so much more, there is a sort of feeling that it's an extension of high school in some ways, and we'll get parents contacting us and stuff like that. And I'm like, you're a grown-up. You're old enough to vote and go to war. You're a grown-up person. You need to learn to do that. And, and if parents are still paying, they still feel that ownership. But I'm like, well, that's not how it works, friend. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and they're doing their kids a disservice.
Well, I think so too. And I mean, this is the thing as well. You've got to sort of say, I mean, and the other side, of course, is that when you're learning to be an adult, you don't back yourself. You don't trust yourself. And so I think that it's building confidence as well. And I'm very aware, particularly now, like I'm 43 now, so I do have students who, if I'd started early, could be mine. I mean, I had, and because I talk about my kids and everything, there's this kind of thing of like, I don't want to mother them, but at the same time, I want to say to them, listen, you're working this out. You have to just back yourself a bit. You know what I mean? Like you need to take some responsibility in a good and a bad way, and that means if you want to stay up all night and have a crack, that's up to you. But if it all falls apart, that's also on you, and I'm not going to be nasty to you. I'm not going to, if I run into you at the coffee cart, I'm not going to ignore you or hold it against you or whatever, but you just got to own it one way or another. And I mean, there will be some too. We have big, hard conversations where they'll be like, oh, so why should I stay? So, well, don't, if you don't want to. We're not going anywhere. If you're not ready yet, go off. Go, some of my best friends went off and just worked in service stations and coffee shops and just grew up a bit. They weren't ready. So that's cool. We'll be here. We're not going anywhere. If you're good enough when you're 19, you'll be good enough when you're 25, when you're 45. Come back when you're ready, which is probably not what the university wants you to say. But I don't want them to waste it. I mean, it costs too much money apart from anything else. So I don't want you to waste your precious time and money on something that isn't working for you. You know what I mean? And it's got nothing to do with it's got nothing to do with how intelligent you are. It's got everything to do with just what your circumstances are, Yeah, so it's difficult because I sort of think too, like I went through, but I worked all the way through as well. I was out of home after my first semester at uni, so I supported myself the whole way through. And I know how hard that is. You know what I mean? I know how hard it is. I was lucky that I was working on campus, so I could literally work a 7-hour day and in between those 7 hours be doing classes, and my commute was a minute and a half. Like that doesn't work if you're not working on campus. But yeah, it's really difficult. It's a really difficult thing. I don't know that I'd want to be 21 again at the moment. It's a hard thing, and I hope that we're not just making it harder for the people that are coming after us.
Mm. I've definitely seen people that they're doing it for somebody else, or they're doing it for the wrong reasons, and it's just a slog. And
yeah,
I mean, you could tell there's something in their heart where they know this isn't right, they shouldn't be there, but they slog through. And then I've seen people, like you said, like a little bit later in life, want this, like they want it, and they get in there and they kill it, right? They just absorb everything. They truly enjoy what they're doing. So yeah, I don't know about over there, but over here, the U.S., at least traditionally, there's this expectation of, you work really hard in high school, and then you get into a good college, and you just kill yourself the entire way, and then right out of there, you get a great job. And there was this interesting divide about a decade ago where kids were following that pattern, and then they would graduate, and then there were no jobs. So yeah, it was like, what now? Like, like I'm going through the textbook, or rather the playbook here, and I followed all the steps, and then this thing wasn't here for me. So that's got to be terrifying.
Yeah, and I think, look, I mean, part of that problem though too is the system, because in between, those educational places are taking on more people. They're taking on people arguably before they're ready, or they're putting more pressure on them. So you don't have all those other skills. I mean, apart from anything else, I'll see students who, are getting good marks, but they're also trying to find out what the system is so that they can game it a bit. But then those things don't work when you try and apply for a job. I'm like, well, you can apply to me for an extension and try, or say, I know you asked for, the classic one would be in music, where it'd say, well, I know that I asked for a song or whatever that's 3 minutes, you've given me 7, but that's not going to work in industry. Like your job is to understand if you've been booked to be there at 10 p.m. and you don't turn up at 10 p.m, that's it, you're done. Or if you've been asked to apply for a thing and you don't do it in the way they want by the time they want, well, you won't, that's it, you're done. And so there's those kind of hard skills that I guess we've got pressure to not enforce because they're not nice when you're learning, but they also are necessary on the other end. And I mean, that idea too that, it's some kind of guarantee is hard as well, because I don't know, there are no guarantees.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, do it, I mean, you're saying people that did it because they love it, or people that are there for someone else. I was kind of a mixture of the two, I guess, when I went through. I think a lot of people go to uni because they got in and they went, okay, well, I'm here now. And I don't hate it, And there's a bit of kind of, it's a waiting room, It's like, I'll do this for a while until I work out who I am and what I want, And that's really, I mean, that's fine, but it's just as, and I think that there's a certain prestige and there's a certain kind of social, cultural expectation. It's kind of more respectable to be mucking around at uni than it is to be, I don't know, working as a waiter or working, wherever you're working. But I think that that's a pain. That's not right, like, just if you got to work it out, just work it out, And I obviously, I teach in unis. I believe in them. I think that, anybody who wants to come should be able to come, but it's by no means the be all and the end all. And it shouldn't be this kind of thing that you have to do at a certain time in a certain way. It should be open to you if and when you're ready, but it shouldn't be any better or worse than, I mean, we've got TAFE here, which is, I guess, the equivalent of community college, those technical things, which got absolutely, the funding's been ripped out from under them. But that's where people are learning to be plumbers, and people are learning to be hairdressers and early childhood workers and nurses and, all of that stuff that you're like, okay, well, this is a problem if we're not training people to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean?
I've said, like, college is a good option, but it's not the only option, right? It's not right for 100%. Everybody.
No,
Yeah.
100%. And, also too, I think that, like I say, the prestige that's attached to it
Mm.
is it's its own worst enemy, because then people start to believe their own bullshit. They start to believe, if I can say that, they start to believe that they're somehow better and somehow more worthy. And I think that we should always be held to account. I think we should always be thinking, and I mean, this is my politics and my kind of preferences too. Like, what I study is popular culture. I make a really big deal of, if it's popular, I need to know about it, because I sort of think if you probably see I've got Elton John and Harry Styles behind me, like Kylie Minogue, like that. If many people are into it, then I'm like, well, it's my job as a publicly funded institution to find out why this resonates with the public. You know what I mean? That's what I think. But, you need diversity. Just as I'm doing this, there should be someone else doing something that's very niche and appeals to only a small group, and that's cool as well, Yeah, I think I'm rambling now. I'm sorry, Craig.
No, I love it. I love it. The less talking I do, the better it is. But you mentioned pop culture. That was really interesting, the way you worded that it's important. Like, where's that sense of importance? Why do you need to know? Why do you need to understand why something is popular like that?
Well, because I think it's partly because, the Academy would say, oh, it's a waste. Why would you? If anybody can do it. I guess this is where the kind of hierarchy comes in. There's kind of this thing that there's no barrier to entry for popular culture, right? The idea is you don't need to know very much. You compare, say, Elton John to, a high art aria somewhere. It's not, or actually Elton's probably a bad example because you've got to pay a lot of money. Oh, no, listen to the radio or something. But my point is that pop culture is everywhere. It's in everything we do. It's all around us, which means it's the stuff of the everyday. It's, and it's not remarkable from that point of view. Whereas you might say a high opera or a big orchestra or any of those kind of cliched high art things you want to think about, they're for special occasions. They cost a lot of money. You've got to have a lot of cultural knowledge to get in there and know what's going on, all of that kind of stuff. It's for a certain type of person, for a certain type of event. Pop culture is everywhere. We use it for everything, but it's also what we use to understand each other in the everyday. You know what I mean? So you may love or hate Harry Styles or Elton John, but you'll at least have heard of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You and I can have a conversation. It's a place to start. Plus, because it's the everyday, to me what's so valuable about it is we use it for the things of everyday. You can talk about how wonderful high art stuff is for very important state occasions and whatever, but pop culture is the thing that, you might listen to when you go to sleep at night, or you might put on when you get up in the morning, or you listen to while you're running, like Coombsy and our mate Coombsy talked about how the beauty of pop culture, like he listens to he has music videos on in the background because they have a company. Like, that's wonderful. Like, in one way you can say, isn't it great that there's certain, musicians and a level of, musicianship or artistry can entertain kings. But isn't it great that you've got something that can hold, like, metaphorically hold somebody's hand when they're sick, that they can just get by flicking it on? Doesn't cost very much, if anything. You know what I mean? It's there. They can have a conversation with someone else about it. You don't need to know, you don't need to know a whole lot of stuff to get it, to have it make sense. But just because it appears simplistic doesn't mean that it is simple or that its effect is simple. You know what I mean? That's the other trick to it too. That's the thing I love about it. People might have a go at, pop music is my thing. They might have a go, oh, it's only got 3 chords and, what's the point of that? I'm like, well, if anybody could do it, anybody would. Don't you reckon? Like, it's like a tightrope. There's so few tools to make that work. Man, that's a proper artist. You know what I mean? I think anyway, like, that's real talent to have so few ingredients and make such a good dish, to lean into the, the fancy restaurant thing, So yeah, I mean, and then of course there's the culture wars that come around the type of people, certain people like certain things. Are more people worthy than others to study? Are more people worthy than others? Are their preferences and their tastes more worthy? And the thing with pop music, of course, is that comes down gendered lines and socioeconomic lines a lot. You know what I mean? It's the minute you think about something that teenage girls, for example, are into, it's already considered less than, because it's an audience that, for whatever reason, we've decided we don't care as much about. And I think, why is that? Not just because I was one, But also, like, why is that? Why is some person's opinion worth less, or some person's formative years worth less than somebody else's? Like, why have we decided that that's okay? You know, and do we still think that's okay? I don't. That's why I'm interested in that stuff.
Hey, you know, I've always thought, I was talking to somebody, and God, it escapes me because I always love attributing, you know, who told me a thing. But, if I think long enough, it'll come to me. But that doesn't make for good radio, right? Ultimately, what they told me, excuse me, was that your outfit, your fashion, is a signal to everybody around you that, hey, if you're part of my tribe, come talk to me. You know, and
Yeah.
I've thought for a lot of us, and I'm definitely speaking about myself. For most of
Yep.
my life, there is no fashion. You know what I mean? There is no sense of fashion or any of that stuff. But something that I could use to find my tribe was pop culture, right? Because there's always something I love or I'm into. I really got something out of this. Either it's really funny or it's really moving or it's touching piece or something like that. And when you find those other people, right, you can have this conversation. Oh, what kind of movies you like? And so you start bonding over those little pop culture things. I think that's
Exactly.
such an amazing way to find your people, find your tribe, find your common ground. And something else you were mentioning is like people are gatekeepers, and I am neither one of these people. But you have generally Star Wars nerds and Star Trek nerds, and they war with each other. I don't understand that.
Yeah.
Like, why can't people just like the things they like? I don't know why you got to yuck on somebody else's yum, but I think it's interesting.
Yuck on someone's yum. I like that. I haven't heard that before. I think, well, I mean, here's the thing too. Like, it's how, and I'm going to try and get this quote right, but I mean, there's a whole subsection of pop culture studies that is fan studies now. And they think about the idea that you use your fandom basically to speak on your behalf, is the idea. So I think it was Lawrence Grossberg that said that, but I could be wrong. So, you know, people can find me out. And lots of people have talked about it since. But so exactly that. If you wear a T-shirt that's got, I don't know, Harry Styles, Iron Maiden, whatever, if you wear that on your T-shirt, walking down the street, that says to other people, for better or for worse, this type of person I am. I'm letting that pop culture speak for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people can make their own decision, better or worse. And in some ways, I mean, I always loved the safety of that because people then can argue with me about my taste rather than about myself. Then I quite like that. You know, it's one step removed. You and I can have you want to argue Star Trek, Star Wars. I love throwing Doctor Who in there and just really freaking them out. It's great. You know, which one? People love is it Star Wars where there's the gold man? You know, there's a silver man called a Cyberman that happened earlier than that, don't you, George? You know that? Let's upset people, really. But I mean, I guess that's the sport of it, right? And this is the other side. If we look at fandom and sports fandom is so much more acceptable than pop culture fandom. And again, it's a gendered thing. You know what I mean? Teenage boys who absolutely lose all of their emotions, who go and scream and carry on and get obsessed with sports, are celebrated as they should be, are given this outlet as they should be, are allowed to explore and engage with each other and form lifelong bonds and all of that stuff. But if we talk about that over pop culture, often especially if it's women or people that aren't the right type of man or the right type of presenting gender, then that's a bit weird, a bit nerdy. Is there something not quite right with you? But it's the same thing. What's the difference between screaming at a rock concert and screaming at a football game? It's all a release, right? And the same deal. You're standing in the line, you're wearing your jersey, I'm wearing my jersey. Hey, we're brother and sister, or no, we're not, we're rivals. You know, until we get to the nationals, at which point then, yes, we're brother and sister again, you know. So it's this weird, to me, that's the beauty of it. It lets us connect with each other without actually connecting with each other. And it lets us differ from each other without actually differing from each other as well. You know, there is that kind of safety net. And I also think the beauty of it and the wonder of it is that it lets us know we're not alone. You know what I mean? And that cliche. But I mean, I always say this to the students that have enrolled, and I'll start a class and say, right, who's disappointed their parents by being here? Like, whose parents was hoping they'd be an accountant, you know, or something useful, and here you are doing arts or whatever. They say, yeah, but you know, that doctor, that lawyer, those nurses, those first responders, all need something to put them to sleep at night, all need something to wake them up in the morning, and that's what art does. You know what I mean? That's connecting us and it's letting us know. And the most pop of pop, you know, the thing you can turn on a radio, open up, get for free, that you can talk to your grandma about or whatever. That's what does it. You know what I mean? It's not behind it's not in a conservatorium. It's not behind a massive paywall. It's not $1,000 a ticket. It's the everyday stuff that lets you do that lets you know you're not alone and you've got a connection. And that's not just right now, that's over generations. Like, I don't know about you, but I'll listen to, if I listen to Tony Bennett, say, or somebody that's passed or somebody that's written, I'll listen to early Carole King, when she was a young mum, and I think, oh my God, you felt that too, like 50 years ago. I'm not the only person that's felt this way, and I just think that's, and for better, for worse, that's what the whole cliche of sex, drugs and rock and roll is. That's why people love that as well, that whole teenage time when you go, oh, wow, I'm not the only person that's felt this either. You know what I mean? It's the beautiful honest. It's I'm be too daggy and say it's the human condition, but it is. It lets us know that we're not the first people to ever gone through this. And I think that's particularly powerful now when people do feel alone, when people do feel isolated, and they can literally be told, I have felt this way too, and I mean, you must have heard that cliche, and we hear artists say it all the time. I used to get it when I was interviewing people a lot more, and they'd say, people would say, you wrote that song for me.
Sure.
We've never met, of course we've never met, but we've all felt that feeling, somebody made this for me, somebody gets it. And I, that gratitude that you have, and that, it's hard to describe, isn't it? I mean, I don't know about you. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you have that feeling where you feel like, no, this has been made for me. I get this. They get me,
Yeah, I am atypical. So my brain doesn't necessarily process the way I'm somewhat neurodivergent. So a lot of things that are common for the average person aren't common for me. So I love these fascinating looks. That's one of them for me, because I've heard people talk about how much representation matters, right? Whether it's in pop culture or media or in politics or any of that stuff. Or I think that's kind of akin to what you're saying now. It's like, somebody understands me, somebody gets me. I find that commonality there. That's not something that is ever really moved through my brain.
Oh, really?
In that fashion. Yeah. So it's a fascinating look on how people work for me. So I'm truly enjoying this.
So if you have a particular, are you a pop culture guy? Like, is there something that really, if we're going to go to a Comic-Con or buy you a concert ticket or something and recommend me a film or TV or something?
I like tons of stuff, but I don't necessarily stand for any one thing. You know what I mean? Like, okay. I don't go crazy. So I do go to Comic-Cons. I have thoroughly enjoyed Doctor Who since the reboot stuff. I never really watched the original, but when they rebooted, I've done pretty good. I've fallen off the last year or so because they took, what was there, like kind of there was like a year gap, I think they put in there.
They've run out of money.
Yeah. And
it's Dr. Spacetime now for you, isn't it? Professor Spacetime.
Professor Spacetime. Yeah. Yeah. I prefer the version where his companion is a lady dressed in white with a tennis racket. I don't know if you remember that one.
Oh.
Are we talking Community here?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah. So I understand it. I know that important to people, but that's never happened to me. So I find it truly interesting and fascinating. Sometimes when I hear people talk about stuff like that, that doesn't like click in my brain, it's I feel a little left out. I think that's really cool to like feel connected in a community. I totally understand it.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess on the other side too, it doesn't have to be the same thing. You know what I mean? It can be anything.
Mm-hmm.
As long as there's something, and this is what I personally think anyway, is as long as there's something that lets you know that there are other people. You know what I mean? As long as there's something, whatever that is. And it can be sports, it can be TV, it might be in your tech community, on the other end of a microphone, whatever it is, it's as long as there's something that, we have a way to connect with each other. And to me, that's what pop culture does. It's a form of connection.
Yeah.
And, I worry that if we put too many barriers to that, then we're saying certain people aren't invited to the party. And also certain people's connections aren't as valid as other people's connections. And I just think, why are we doing that?
Yeah.
That's dangerous. I'm not up for that.
To me, it feels it feels kind of like the Wild West right now, because I know something, because you teach a podcasting class, which is amazing. Like, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh my God, talk about find your tribe. You're my people. But like the idea of TikTok, or, for kind of the younger generations, where you could just have a thing. I mean, I saw my kid was scrolling on live, and it was somebody who had a bowl of floating eyeballs while they were wearing a mask, and they were just stirring them doing ASMR. And I was like, dude, it is an amazing time to be a creator of kind of anything.
Doing what? Sorry? ASMR? What is that?
Don't ask me what the acronym is, but it's basically where people make noises, or they'll whisper softly into the microphone, or they'll rub certain objects with texture to make a sound, or they do these weird clicks with their voice. It's a kind of an auditory thing that some people have this really visceral reaction to, where it's pleasant. But it's like the strangest thing you could be into, and those people are going to find you, the people that like your thing. Podcasting, I don't know, I kind of still feel like an old fart doing that, although it's getting more and more popular. And as they say, are you really, a middle-aged white guy if you didn't start a podcast in the middle of the pandemic? And I was like, bro, I was doing that before, I promise. I felt like I got my badge. But no, it's just, I love the idea of, what do you call it, like democratizing media nowadays. You can just choose to do a thing and start doing it.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I guess, look, the difference is, of course, it's not all good. Once upon a time. I mean, like the idea of gatekeeping, of course, is that there was a certain level of quality control. Yeah. Okay. So, if I compare radio to podcasting, the idea that if only one person had a microphone, already a few people had microphones, then they had to do quite a lot in order to have the right to have that microphone. Plus there were, it was very easy to see if there was a problem, how to fix it, and all the, what I mean? So there are the downsides, of course. And I mean, that's okay. That happens. I mean, the interesting thing I think that's going to happen with podcasting is if the regulations are going to come in and how that's going to happen. You know what I mean? Because, we know that with broadcasting, because it's region-based, because you've got to pay a lot of money to whatever government you are to get the license and do all of that stuff that comes with certain obligations and restrictions, and often for very good reason. You know what I mean? Whereas podcasting is still a relative wild west. We talked about what can we say and not say. Well, in theory, we can say anything, which is excellent in one way, but also really, really dangerous in others. You know what I mean? And,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's great, but I guess I don't want to quote Yoda here when we say with great power comes great responsibility. Is that Yoda or is that Spider-Man? One of them.
Yeah,
anyway.
Spider-Man, I think.
Spider-Man, sorry. I will upset more pop culture people.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do that on purpose just to see who's listening. It's not always on purpose though. But I mean, I guess that's something to kind of think about. And I mean, I guess that's where the line would be. The line I give my students is that, the difference between just plugging in a microphone and having it go in your bedroom and studying at uni or getting some kind of training is the real ethics of it, I think. Understanding what actually is the power of what you're doing, what is the potential of what you're doing, and are you fully aware of that? Are you making choices as opposed to just stabbing in the dark and hoping you don't hit anybody, And nobody really knows the answers to that yet still, and stuff might change really quickly. I mean, look how quickly Spotify started having exclusives, and what's kind of happened there, what will happen there. You know what I mean? It's starting to happen with music in podcasts now, where the algorithms are starting to be able to pull down infringed materials, all of that kind of stuff, which is probably good in some ways because people were just having a go, waiting to get caught. So it's really interesting, I think, to see what's going to happen next. And maybe people just get sick of it. I don't know. I mean, the other thing to me, I found so interesting when we talked last time, when you were talking about how much you value the visual. To me, the value was anyway, that it was audio only. You know what I mean? But the fact that now certain people have such preference to see as well, makes me think, well, is this even podcasting anymore? Or is this something else? Who knows?
Yeah. I try not to put labels on it.
Yeah.
We're too early in the relationship, Liz. Let's not put any labels on it. Let's not.
You're that guy.
Don't make it weird. No. But we are getting close to time, and there was something I wanted to ask you about, because literally I've got this giant page of notes, and we have hardly talked about anything. You are so
Okay,
fascinating. But something that
I get paid to talk. That's the problem, Greg. I'm sorry.
No. The check's in the mail, I promise. You co-authored a book. So you were talking about research and how much you like the research aspect and doing all this stuff about Kylie Minogue's Kylie album. And I thought that is a very interesting choice. I am actually, not that, I mean, I was alive at that time period, but I wasn't really like listening to music like heavily back then with Kylie. I'm only a year younger than you. But Kylie's, what was it, like 2001, her Fever album? That was the jam, and I could still listen to that, and it is still a hot. And in fact, when I saw you, I started listening to the album again, and it's so awesome. And I was just curious, how did you settle on talking about an album from what, like 30 years ago, 40 years ago?
Well, yeah. Well, the book this wasn't a setup, but I can do it.
Oh, I saw it back there.
There's the book. I wrote it with a friend and colleague of mine, Adrian Renzo. It's for a series, the 33 and a third series, which I'm sure people would know. And this is one that's dedicated to Oceania, so Australia and New Zealand. The idea is that you pick an album and you talk about just that album. And the reason we wanted to talk about the Kylie one, and it came out in 1987, 88, around that time. It wasn't actually that big in the States, I don't think, but it was huge in Australia, massive in the UK, massive in different parts of Europe and whatever. And we picked that one because I was 8 at the time when it came out, and my friend and colleague Adrian was a little older than me. He was sort of an early teenager. And the big thing about it was really commercially successful, very commercially successful, but the critics, particularly at home, were just panned the crap out of it. Yeah. And it was because the wrong audience loved it. So we joked, and we've set up the book with this really daggy 80s acrostic. So we've made the chapters KYLIE to be like,
I saw that.
And yeah. So the K, I'll send you a copy of it. The K is for kinder, because she was kinda girly, kinda gay, right? She wasn't girly in the same way that Madonna was girly or Cyndi Lauper was girly, but she also wasn't gay in the way that like Divine, or in like, she wasn't full, she wasn't full queer. She was in the middle, and that just pissed off everyone. Because they couldn't work out where she lived. And then she'd also come through Neighbours, which was this soap opera, still going actually. It stopped and then it started again. But she, so she's this, she's living in a type of TV that doesn't have a lot of prestige, but has a lot of fans. But they're just the wrong type of fans, So we just kind of wanted to say, well, what? And because the album was so successful, it kicked off with a single of Carole King's Locomotion. And then the big single that you might know is I Should Be So Lucky. You might find it. It's very, very daggy and, hilarious. You should have a look at it. It will get stuck in your head, though. It's not quite Can't Get You Out of My Head, but it will get stuck there. And anybody that's just jumping on Kylie now for Padam, she's been viral for a very long time, friends. I know. Like, enjoy her in Vegas, but she's been viral.
It blew me away. It's like that Padam. I was like, dude, that is such an amazing track. It's like, how are you still doing this? Why are you still doing this, for one? But like,
but also, why not?
Giving us these gifts. I know, just these little, every now and then, just these little gifts. It's on my playlist right now.
Look, but see, the thing about Kylie too is that, like I said, she just was it really was the wrong type of audience. So the gatekeepers at the time, the late 80s in Australia was is a different kind of place as well, insofar as we're removed. We're very influenced by America and Britain, but we're also one step removed. And so in the 80s, there's still quite rampant homophobia in lots of places because we're still coming out of, in the middle of the AIDS epidemic, and people are frightened. And it's no excuse for the hate, but it is a context, you know what I mean? And so there was this, to be anti-Kylie was code for, I guess it's that horrible thing people would say, like, no homo or any of that stuff, you know what I mean? It was homophobia really being broadcast, and so, and we were kind of getting to the, it became this shorthand. If you liked Kylie as a guy, you either wanted to shag, you had to prove that you just liked her because you wanted to shag her, or, you didn't like her because people that liked Kylie might be a bit kind of gay. You know what I mean? Like, that might be an issue. So she became this really weird kind of cultural figure, And in the book, we were sort of unpacking that and saying, well, why have you got somebody who's sort of so commercially successful but so wildly hated by the people in charge? Because apart from anything else, you're pre-social media. If you don't like it, just ignore it. It'll go away. But they did the opposite. They were having I don't know what the American equivalent is of those big rock hard network stations. They have anti-Kylie rallies and stuff. Just ignore it. It's not for you. You know what I mean? What are you doing at a newspaper or at a radio station as a middle-aged white dude saying, I don't like it? Cool. Don't like it, friend.
Yeah, that's fine.
Just don't like it.
Yeah.
Just go and spend the limited brand width that you have. Because again, this is pre-internet. This is everybody's got a station. There's only so many, in Australia, there was 5 TV channels, that was it. Just put something else on. If you don't think it's that good, don't spend it with hate. So we were trying to unpack that too as to why did it get kind of so much hate. And I think it was because that kind of thing, it was in the mainstream. It was so kind of popular, but popular with the wrong people. You know what I mean? And then there was this, and I mean, unfortunately, there was some pretty thinly veiled misogyny in there as well, because all of the examples around, well, is she too much of a pop star, or she came from a soapy, is that a problem, or is she too kind of blonde, is she too whatever? Well, she kind of had a male equivalent. She did have a male equivalent, really, a guy called Jason Donovan. Do you know Jason Donovan? Does that make any sense to you? So the show that she was on called Neighbours, they were the sweethearts in it. Scott and Charlene were the two that got together, right? He also released crappy pop through the same channels, at the same time. Stockate and Waterman were this songwriting factory. They wrote for Rick Astley and all these people, right? So it's that kind of 80s pop. Now, when people said, oh, we don't like her because she's too young, she's too blonde, she's too much in a soapy. Well, Jason is 3 weeks younger than her, was in the soapy at the same time and had a big blonde mullet. So he's basically the male equivalent. They did not hang any of the shit on him that they hung on her. So it's okay.
Was he nearly as successful in the pop career?
Well, hilariously, I mean, at that time, he was comparable, certainly.
Well,
but he just didn't get the vitriol. He didn't get that hate that she got, And partly too, I mean, and it was the classic kind of nerd thing of people would make fun of her because she could get in, do something quickly and get out again. You know what I mean? She was just a professional. This is why she's done so well, is because she'd turn up to a recording studio, she'd rehearsed, she knew her mark, she could go in, she'd get in the first or second take, and then she could get out again because she understood that time was money.
Yeah.
And she'd worked really, really hard to be able to do a good performance. And then people were making fun of that. Why is, that's the schoolyard equivalent of making fun of you because you've done your homework or you're nerd. I mean, oh my goodness, how dare you go in and want to learn a thing?
Yeah.
Who's the fool here, So it's been interesting. I mean, we had a great time putting it together. We did a lot of laughing and we also very, openly and honestly said, this has not all of it has aged beautifully. It's a time capsule. I'm not going to put it up against Sgt. Pepper's or Dark Side of the Moon or, whatever great album you've got in your preference for great albums of all time. But it's a really interesting cultural moment. And I think we also started it off by saying this is a story about her. It's not a story about the men. Lots of people talk about Kylie. They talk about the fact that her and Michael Hutchence were together for a while. Or they talk about the fact that her and Nick Cave performed together, whatever. There's a guy called Michael Gudinski here who ran a really important label called Mushroom Records who, she was one of the staples of. People talk about Gudinski and all of that. So no, this is just about Kylie. It's just about her, and even pulling that back was hard, because people would be like, oh, so tell us about when she did, Can't Get You Out of My Head or the Hot Pants or whatever. No, just about this young woman and what she achieved. So it was, I hope people like it. We had fun. We've got our first review was a 1-star on Amazon who said, I only bought it because she's on the cover. If that's okay, your money still spends the same. That's fine. I'll still get the 0.35 of a cent or whatever I might get in royalties if they ever bother sending it to me. So, I'm not making my fortune. That's okay. Whatever.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I have so many more questions, but we have no more time. So I want to be absolutely respectful of your time. I know you're a busy person and you've got things to do. So right here at the end, I want to ask, is there anything you would like to promote or push? I definitely wanted to talk about your book. So, everybody listening, you should go check out the Kylie book. It actually sounds like an interesting snapshot or view into Australian culture if you're not an Australian. Maybe kind of what was going on at the time. But tell us, how can we find you? What would you like to like us to how people interact with you?
Thanks, Greg. I'm just on. You can find me. Just Google my name. I turn up. I mean, I've written a few things. The Kylie one is one. There's another one behind me that's called Popular Music and Parenting, which is one of those ones that you probably want to get via a library. But that's kind of the type of thing that we were talking about now, about how we connect with each other culturally. And it's kind of, if you're a Bluey fan, that's the thing that maybe Americans would know about Australia at the moment is Bluey. And I write. There's a chapter on that, interviewing the composer, the guy that writes the amazing music for that show, which I think is what makes it work. Joff Bush is the guy's name. So if you're interested in that, you can find that. Otherwise, I'm on social media. What used to be the artist formerly known as Twitter.
It's Twitter.
I'm on there. Yeah, just with my name, LizGiuffre. I'm on Instagram, but probably not as much as I should be. So you can find me, or I'll be following you, and people can go that way. Just listen to what you like. You don't have to listen to me.
Excellent, Liz. Well, you are a blast, and I basically just got to sit back and watch the performance, which is really, really cool for me. You are an amazing speaker, awesome at really answering every question that I could potentially throw at you. And fortunate for you, I have so many pages of questions that maybe if we make this like a 40-part series, we can get through a quarter of these or so.
Oh, that's very kind. You went and did some reading. Sorry, Greg.
No,
very kind.
No. I'm basically saying I made like 2 pages of notes just based off of what you said. You've covered so much interesting ground. I would, I think people definitely need to find you, because you are also, I know you didn't promote it, but I'll put links to it. You are podcasting with Coombsy. And are you doing any other ones that you want people to find?
Yeah.
All right.
So the podcast is Unofficial Art Therapy. That's with Coombsy. And we just talk about, it is what it says on the tin. We talk about art as therapy, but we are not. Coombsy's actually the medical professional, not me. I'm just the doctor lady that talks about pop stuff.
The doctor
But
lady.
it's just chat. I am a doctor lady, but we just talk about, less a lady, but certainly a doctor. And I also have a podcast called Music Mothers and Others, which comes out of a little community radio station here. But you can find that musicmothersandothers.com, and that's just talking about what it means to be in the music industry or arts industries with caring responsibilities. So you don't have to be a parent. You can be the child of a parent. You can be somebody who's just part of the village, and say, how do we engage, and how does it work if you're a worker, or how does it not work? But also, what would we make better? So one of the best things I think about that is that we say to people, what would you change? What would you do that would really make a difference to having you be able to participate more, or having other people be able to participate more, or anything like that. So we learn. That's me and my friend Shelley, who's also a doctor lady. We do that one, and yeah, the sound quality has been not as good as this one. But that's because that's what we were doing. We were the cliche 2 mums in lockdown who went, oh my God, what are we going to do? And my son was very little when we started that one. He was like 2 months old or something. So you'd often hear a crying baby in the background, and we'd have to sometimes preempt episodes with, I promise he's fine. Don't call the authorities. There's somebody with him. But
For sure. All right. I'll tell you what, let me hit stop on all this stuff really quick. I've got to get you out of here.